You're listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 35.
Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell.
I'm very happy to welcome Michael Jackson on the show today. Michael is the Managing Director at the Australian Wool Testing Authority, in short AWTA. Michael is a very special guest today because he is an important leader within the Australian wool industry as well as on international level. Michael is very active within AWTA, where he is the chairman of the Contracts and Specifications Committee, but he is also a member of the AWTA Executive Committee. AWTA is a group of laboratories that test manufactured goods as well as agricultural and horticultural goods. I just had to look up the word horticultural, and horticultural goods summarizes all fruit, vegetables, and flowers. What is important for us today on the podcast is that AWTA is also the largest wool testing organization in the world. A warm welcome to you, Michael. Thank you for your time today, and it's so good to talk to you.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Pleasure to talk to you.
To get us started, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and about the work that you do for the wool industry.
Okay, well, as you stated there, Lisa, my main job is as CEO of AWTA, or Australian Wool Testing Authority, and I've been in that role for, I think, about 16 years now, and my working career before that was also with AWTA, sort of progressing from a technical research role through into more of an admin and management role. And that followed really me getting interested in the wool industry when I went to although I'm a city boy, I went to an agricultural high school and sort of got the bug, if you like, for getting into the wool industry, as so many of us do in the wool industry. And I think you've spoken to quite a few people like that in your year or two having this podcast going.
Yeah, that's true.
I followed that up with, and I sort of was enthused enough through high school to go and do what was then a specialist course at the Uni of New South Wales called Wool and Pastoral Sciences, and one thing led to another, and here I am at AWTA.
Yeah, so I guess the other week I talked to Philippa Wright, who kind of accidentally felt she happened to land in the wool industry, but you actually deliberately planned to land in the wool industry.
Well, yeah, from university on, let's say that.
Yeah.
School, it was more a matter of happening to go to an agricultural high school.
Okay. Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about the Australian Wool Testing Authority. What kind of services does AWTA offer?
AWTA is an industry-owned non-profit company that was established in 1957 specifically to provide independent results to the wool industry, and specifically it was established to provide results that both the buyer and the seller could equally rely on. And in those days, that testing was really just on scoured wool that was being exported, and over the years, as pre-sale measurement grew and as the industry moved towards using more and more objective measurement for the trade of wool back to the grower level, AWTA grew and became a substantial organisation within the wool industry in Australia and internationally. And in more recent years, with the decline in sheep numbers from the artificial highs of the reserve price scheme, AWTA has diversified to start testing some of the products you mentioned, although, Lisa, I hadn't thought about flowers as being part of horticulture, so maybe you've given us another idea there.
Okay, that's what I read in the dictionary.
Yeah, I know, I'm sure you're right. So we now have 4 divisions, one being raw wool in Australia, which is still about 2/3 of our company revenue. Then we have an agri-food division that does the horticulture, processed food, grains and animal fodder testing. We have a product testing division which tests textiles and building products and some automotive components, flooring materials, things like that. And our 4th division is NZWTA, that I'm sure a number of your readers or listeners are familiar to in New Zealand that also provide wool testing and textile testing services in New Zealand.
Yeah, and you said so still the biggest division is the wool testing. Can you, give a little bit more details about that part of the business?
Okay, well, that's really the division that AWTA was formed to become. As I mentioned, it's about 2/3 of our business. If I go back 15 years ago, it was 95% of our business. So those other areas have now grown. But it's really its task, I suppose, is to provide totally independent, impartial, and high integrity information about wool, so that wool growers are confident when they sell their wool that they're getting a fair price for their product, and wool buyers, whether they're first stage buyers in Australia or in New Zealand, or if they're the actual processors of that wool in Europe or in China, are confident that they're actually getting what they pay for. And by both buyers and sellers having trust in the integrity and impartiality of our services, we help efficiency grow in the wool supply chain, and we also reduce a lot of the trade disputes that would occur if you didn't have an independent test house like AWTA in that role.
Yeah, and I had once the chance to visit your wool testing lab, and it was quite huge, and there were so many different tests that you actually perform on wool. And can you tell us a little bit, give us an overview, what are the different tests that raw wool goes through in your lab?
Well, I think the most fundamental test we do is at the sampling line, where we actually weigh the bales, and that bale weight is independently certified, and the yield information that we then also test in the laboratory is tied back to that bale weight, and that gives the quantity of product that can be expected to be produced from that bale of wool, and that's really what people are prepared to pay for. Then if you look at the quality aspect, the major price determinants are fibre diameter, or micron, as a lot of people will refer to it, vegetable matter content, staple length, staple strength, and position of break are the major test parameters that we're measuring.
I saw that on your website you can choose or pay more if you want quicker results, but how long would it typically take for all these tests that are typically performed?
Well, what we define as our normal service is roughly 2 days. So you've got the day of sampling, and then 2 days later those results will all be available to the buyer and seller. Express service that you mentioned is basically overnight testing. So if we sample that wool today, we'll have a result for you in the morning. And obviously, it's a pretty big logistics exercise in our Melbourne lab that I think you came through, Lisa, where we're testing at the busiest time of the year almost 2,000 different lots a day, and we have to do multiple tests on each of those lots. So scheduling all of that testing so that we can meet those service times, and so that catalogues are ready for auction, or shipping deadlines are met for people putting wool onto shipping containers is all part of the process.
So you actually work in several shifts each day? Or is it 24 hours testing?
We were until recently, but we've managed to improve our efficiencies in a lot of areas, and we now work in the Melbourne lab, we're working 2 shifts each day. So we're not quite 24 hours like we used to be. Reduced volumes have had a bit to do with that, but even more so is productivity improvements that we've made, so that we can arrange our work to be completed in less hours.
Okay, and I think when I went through your lab and got the tour, someone mentioned that actually because you have all these test samples that at the end you can all collect, and you kind of hold, or kind of then the largest amount of wool, what happens with wool? I think there was you were kind of the biggest wool supplier in the end if you put all those
Oh,
samples together?
yeah, I'm not sure we're the biggest. I think there's a few wool growers out there that produce quite a few more bales than us, but we would certainly be in the top 5% of wool growers, if you wanted to call us that, where we sell that residual sample material that wasn't destroyed during the testing process.
Yeah, so I always find that amazing that even all kind of wool and even those tests can be somehow used for some product somewhere.
Yeah, that's a incredibly buoyant part of the wool market at the moment. Is anyone who looks at the merino carding indicators would see that they're at record prices, and that sample material that we have is quite short. It's 20 millimetre core tubes that have taken most of that wool, and they're getting very attractive prices at the moment because it goes into that buoyant section of the market.
Yeah, that's very lucky for you at the moment then. Yeah,
Won't
tell me then, so you did all the tests, but then how, you mentioned that briefly, where did all these test results then go to, and how is the supply chain using them?
Okay, well, we'll issue the results electronically back to whoever requested us to do the test. Commonly, that's a wool broker if the wool is going to auction, but it may be a private merchant. It may be someone who's selling that wool electronically. So as our customer, they'll take those results. They'll then advertise them to the potential buyers of the wool and have either a tender process or commonly an open cry auction where someone has looked at the wool sample in conjunction with our test results and determined how much they're prepared to pay for it. So in the sales transaction, that's the first step. Then whoever's exporting that wool will normally need to show a bank somewhere or show a customer overseas that the wool matches the order that their customer has made. And our test certificates are really the document of quality that's used to demonstrate that the delivery complies with the purchase order. So again, that's a trading requirement. In 99% of cases is an AWTA test certificate must accompany the shipping documents, etc., to ensure that the bank will release the money. And then further down the pipeline, the processors who are processing that will use our test results and certificates to, for their quality control purposes, to monitor the for example, the fibre diameter at the top they're making, or the average fibre length that they're getting, and they'd expect that to be very close to what our test results predict it should be.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. And you mentioned to me before the interview that you also have a lot of information on your website, also a lot of videos. So I will make sure to link to those in the show notes so that people who want to find out a little bit more about testing and what kind of tests there are, and etc., can go there for more information.
I'd encourage them to do that. I mean, you've been lucky enough, Lisa, to come down to Australia and have a tour through the laboratory, but the videos that have been made are really to show people what's happening in there. So it's a good opportunity, I think, for people.
Yeah, great. No, I agree. It's of course even nicer to visit you, but those videos will be of big help as well. And one thing that I also learned is that you take part in round trial tests, and maybe that's obvious for people working in laboratories, but for me it wasn't obviously. So please explain what are these round trial tests and why are they important?
Okay, any laboratory that's producing a result is if it's working in isolation and not cooperating with other laboratories, then you never really know whether the results are accurate and what the precision of those results are. So what a whole group of raw wool laboratories around the world do in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the UK, and at a lesser level in China and in the South American countries do is send around samples of the same wool that we all test at the same time, and we then put the results back into an independent mailbox. By mailbox, I mean a technician who gets all of those results and does some statistical analysis, and we can then sit down and look at, are we producing results that are are consistent with each other. And if there are laboratories that don't, then what do we need to do to align our processes so that regardless of whether you're buying wool from Australia or South Africa or merino wool from New Zealand or from Uruguay, that you can trust the test certificate that you're buying it on. And I think that's one of the real strengths of the wool industry, is that those laboratories who are not competing with each other work very closely together to make sure that we are all providing results that are consistent and that therefore people down the chain can rely on.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something that it's quite special or unique for the wool industry, and that brings me to my other question, that once I talked to someone from the cotton industry, and they actually mentioned to me that the wool industry was quite unique because we had all these, or that we had one set of standards, because in cotton they would actually have different standards for different countries. And also another thing that I think I saw on your website is that you said that other animal hair fibers, so like cashmere or maybe alpaca, are not as advanced with their testing standards. So it seems to be a very unique situation that wool can supply these very strong test results, and only one test result and not several ones. So maybe speak a little bit about this unique situation and how that actually evolved.
I think there are probably two components to it, Lisa. One is going back to the history, and I think I mentioned before when AWTA started in 1957, it was established because there had been exporters in Australia who were selling scoured wool, and they were sick and tired of having arguments, commercial disputes with their customers in, for example, the UK, because the weight of the bale of wool would change during shipping. Wool picks up and loses moisture more than any other fibre. So that was a recipe for commercial dispute when you've got a bale that might weigh 110 kilos and you ship it across the world and suddenly the same bale weighs 115. How do you pay for that? And it led to probably some questionable commercial practices in the first instance, where, if you could top up the water in the wool a little bit, then maybe the bale would weigh a bit more and you could get a bit more for it. But that was a very short-term approach, and a number of exporters were wanting to avoid those disputes and have long-term relationships with their clients where they knew that there wouldn't be a dispute over the simple bale weight, because they would standardise the moisture contents. And that I think was the start of establishing AWTA as an independent test house with the express aim of producing results that would be accepted by both sides of the selling transaction. And that's carried through to this day, where AWTA and the other test houses around the world see that strict impartiality and independence and highest integrity is our most important asset. So we all act to protect that. I suppose the other side is through IWTA, where, and again going back in those days, the foresight of the people to recognise that developing international standards that were accepted by our customers, by that I mean customers of our test certificates, whether they be growers selling their wool or whether they be processing mills buying it, was critical. So rather than having a whole series of national standards that might have differences, those test houses, along with other technical people from processing mills and everywhere else in the world, got together and started to push those test methods through IWTA. So there was industry standardisation, and so that goal of having a single result that could be relied on by both sides of the trading transaction was actually achieved. And I think it is something that is, if not unique, it's certainly unusual to the wool trade, and I think it's served it very, very well over a long period of time.
Yeah, and that's actually still happening every year at the AWTA Congress, that these standards get reviewed and updated where necessary. So it's a living document, and it's always up to date, so to say.
Yeah, that's right, and it's all through peer review and peer approval.
Yeah, and I guess what's also unique is that everybody does that on their own time, so to say. So everybody contributes on industry level to achieve this level of standard.
Oh, that's right. IWTO itself doesn't have a staff of technicians doing this work. It's up to the various members of the trade to do work, bring it forward, and then for everyone else to review that and critique it and decide whether it's up to standard for being approved within the IWTO test methods, etc.
Yeah, and then the latest test standards that were added to the IWTO, it's called the Red Book and the Wet Book. So to the Red Book is actually fabric testing, and you at AWTA have done a lot of research and development in the testing equipment and development of test standards in this area. So please talk a little bit about that. What is that all about?
I think the one you're referring to mainly, Lisa, is a test method for the comfort meter, which was just accepted as a full test method at the meeting in Harrogate a few months ago. And that relates to work that was done by a cooperative research centre in Australia involving CSIRO, various universities in Australia, AWTA, AWI have been involved at various stages as well, where they're looking at the next skin comfort of very fine knitwear, and there are a number of user trials done. Sorry, I'm tying myself up a bit here, Lisa, but if you think back, I'm sure you've heard the often held thought that people are allergic to wool, or that wool is a prickly fabric and that wool's no good for wearing next to the skin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the work that's been done clearly demonstrates that wool can be an exceptional fabric to wear next to the skin, providing that the quality of the wool and of the construction is suitable for that purpose. And what the comfort meter has been designed to do is produce a method of measuring the next to skin comfort, so that hopefully down the track what you'd find is that people have then got a specification they can use to ensure that if they are buying that fabric, whether they're a brand or a retailer who want to sell that on, that they know that it will perform very well when it's used, particularly in exercise environments and some of that active outdoor pursuits that are becoming, I think, a bit of a real niche that the wool industry's been chasing pretty hard, and the test method now gives us a chance to ensure that the industry can have good quality control processes around that, and it also opens up the way for some exciting new areas. And I think you will have seen the work that Angus Island from AWTA presented at Harrogate, showing the use of wool to try to help skin conditions like eczema and some of those others. And again, an essential part of doing that is ensuring that you've got machines and testing regimes that can support that work. And that's what we're very keen to be pushing.
Yeah, no, and we had Angus also on the show already a few months ago, so that is also definitely worth listening into. And he mentioned exactly this test that you just described. So thank you for providing a little bit more background on that. That's really helpful.
Okay.
So great. Maybe I have one more question that I didn't send to you before, but maybe you know spontaneously. Do you have a favorite story that you experienced within the wool industry, be it a trip or something else that you can share with us?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot there. I'm no good at these. What's your favourite movie? What's this? It'll take a lot longer to think about it than that. But I think it's probably a bit stereotyped, but I really have enjoyed the passion that you see so many people in the wool industry have, and the thing I think that's particularly good now is or encouraging, I should say now, is that when I go and visit some wool top makers in China who are relatively new to the game, really, when you compare their history of processing to that in Europe, that same passion is coming through. And I don't think it matters where we go. We end up meeting people who become good friends with us. But I think the thing that ties a lot of us together is that everyone really, really does find that the fibre and the industry and everything is so much more than what a lot of other industries are, and people do become really passionate about it rather than just finding it as a vehicle to get rich quick.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and I can totally second that. It's indeed addictive and a true passion to be working in wool. So thank you for that. So we already mentioned that you have some videos on your website, and are there any other social media outlets where AWTA is active that your listeners could connect with?
We do. Yeah, the websites are our main way of communicating, and if you start at awta.com.au, you can explore into the other divisions and websites on the comfort meter, for example, that we just talked about, and that's a good kick-off point for all of that. The other area I think that's useful is AWTA started a number of years ago a Australian Wool Education Trust, which we've now AWI have also joined into that, and the trust has a website called woolwise.com, and I'd encourage people to go have a look at that. There's a lot of detail there in terms of materials that's been developed by university lecturers and others to talk about all types of things that are of interest, not just from a wool testing point of view, but from wool processing and wool growing. So there's a wealth of information there that people can explore. From a social media perspective, the main area we'll put information out in is in the Twitter sphere, if you want to call it that, and that's really trying to draw attention back to the website.
Okay, great. And I didn't know about the Woolwise website, so I will check that out and link to also the Twitter and that website in the show notes. So thank you for sharing that. That would be really interesting. Well, thank you, Michael, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I thought it was really helpful and interesting. And I wish you lots of further success with AWTA.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hopefully you learned a lot about wool testing today with Michael Jackson from AWTA. You can find all the information and the links mentioned in today's episode in the show notes at elisabethvandelden.com/035. Once again, elisabethvandelden.com/035. I also wanted to let you know that I have started a newsletter that I send out twice a month. In the newsletter, I give a summary of all the content that I share on my blog and website, along with other interesting news. If you are interested in joining my mailing list, then sign up at elisabethvandelden.com/newsletter. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. Bye for now.